Preston Vale told a visiting board member, loud enough for her to hear, that Nora Kessler was just hired help who didn't make decisions at his veterans' retreat. Then a storm rolled in. A Navy sniper's mind went back to a firefight that ended years ago. And the only voice that could reach him belonged to the quiet nurse nobody in that building had ever bothered to really see. Comment below and tell us where in the world you're listening from tonight. Hit that like button if you believe some people carry more than the rest of us ever notice, and subscribe so you never miss the next story. Welcome back to Emergency 911 Stories. Preston Vale liked to say his retreat had healed more veterans than any VA hospital in the state. He said it that morning while pointing at Nora Kessler, who was folding towels in the corner of the lodge. "She's just contracted staff," he told the visiting board member, loud enough for her to hear. "She doesn't make decisions here. I do." Nora kept folding. She didn't look up. She had learned a long time ago that the fastest way through a room like this was silence. The Black Ridge Veterans Renewal Center sat at the end of a gravel road, 40 minutes past the last gas station, tucked into pine ridges that swallowed cell signal whole. Preston had built it from a failed marketing career and a lot of borrowed money. He called it healing. Investors called it a tax write-off with a nice view. 8 months ago, Nora had answered a posting for a rural nurse practitioner. No background check beyond her license. No questions about the gap in her resume. That was the point. She needed a place where nobody asked why a 32-year-old woman flinched at loud engine noise, or why her hands sometimes shook when the lodge went quiet at night. She kept her head down. She wore her scrubs, bright cobalt blue against the brown and green of the mountain, and she smiled at patients and said nothing about herself. The board member laughed at something Preston said. He had the practiced ease of a man who had never once been the person a room turned to when things went wrong. Nora carried the towels down the hall, past the rec room where 6 veterans sat playing cards, past the office where the donor wall hung with photos of smiling men in polos shaking hands. At the end of the hall was room 14, Caleb Marsh's room. Caleb had arrived 3 weeks earlier, sent by a program that promised quiet mountain air would do what 6 years of VA waiting rooms hadn't. He rarely spoke. When he did, his voice came out flat, like a man reading a report on someone else's life. Nora had read his intake file once, quickly, before Preston caught her and reminded her that clinical files were above her pay grade to interpret. She hadn't needed the file. She had known who he was the moment she saw him sitting with his back to the wall, watching every door, the same instinct that never left men trained a certain way. 7 years ago, in a country she wasn't supposed to name, she had spent 4 months feeding target packages to a Navy reconnaissance element. She had never met the shooters face to face. She had only heard their call signs over a secure line late at night. In a tent that smelled like diesel and burnt coffee. One of those call signs was Longbow. She told herself it didn't matter. Plenty of men used that call sign over the years. She told herself a lot of things these days to get through a shift without her hands shaking in front of a patient. The staff called Caleb the quiet one. Preston called him a success story in progress, a line he used for donors touring the facility. Nora called him nothing at all. That afternoon, thunderclouds stacked over the ridge the way they did most autumns, promising to knock out the single road in and out for a day, sometimes 2. Preston hated storms. Storms meant no cell signal. No way to post the smiling photos his sponsors expected every week. No way to call the ambulance service 40 minutes down the mountain if something went wrong. "Nothing goes wrong here," he liked to say, as if saying it enough times made it true. He said it again that morning, walking the board member past the donor wall, past the framed magazine article calling Black Ridge a model for the future of veteran care. It never mentioned staffing ratios, or the nearest trauma center, or what happened when the signal dropped. Nora carried the towels past room 14. Through the door, she heard Caleb's breathing change. Fast, uneven. A sound she recognized instantly. Because she had made that exact sound herself, alone, more nights than she wanted to count. She didn't go in. Not yet. She had learned, the hard way, that going in too early only chased a man deeper into whatever place he had gone. She set the towels down outside his door and waited, counting his breaths the way she used to count minutes on a headset, waiting for a shooter to check back in. 1, 2, 3. Somewhere behind her, Preston's laugh rang down the hallway again, easy and untroubled. A man who had never once had to wait like this for anyone. Who had never once had someone else's survival sitting in his own chest, like a held breath. The first roll of thunder came from the west ridge. Caleb's breathing broke into something sharper, something with words caught inside it now, half-formed and urgent. And Nora Kessler, folder of towels, keeper of secrets, felt the old readiness rise up through her spine before she had even decided to move. Down the hall, one of the veterans playing cards looked up at the sound. An older man named Dutch, who had been at Blackridge longer than anyone. He caught Nora's eye for half a second, and something in his weathered face told her he had heard that particular kind of silence before, too. The silence right before a man's mind snapped back to a place none of them could see. "You want me to get the others clear?" Dutch asked quietly, already rising from the card table. "Please," Nora said. And something in her tone made Dutch move faster than she'd seen him move in 8 months on that porch. The door came open before Nora touched it. Caleb was standing, not lying down, both hands raised in a shooting stance aimed at nothing, at a wall, at a memory only he could see. "Contact left," he said, voice flat and certain. "Contact left." "Hold position." 2 aides ran toward the noise and stopped dead in the doorway. Neither of them moved closer. One of them backed away, phone raised, filming instead of helping. Preston arrived seconds later, blazer still buttoned, face already arranging itself into the calm mask he used for donors. "Get him sedated," he said, quietly. "I don't want this getting out." Behind him, the aide with the phone kept filming, thumb hovering near a share button, already imagining the caption that would go with it. Nora reached out without a word and closed her hand over the screen, gently but immovably, until the woman lowered the phone on her own. "Not now," Nora said. "Not ever. Actually, put it away." Nora stood at the edge of the hallway, arms at her sides, watching Caleb's eyes. They weren't seeing the lodge. They were seeing a valley in another country, years gone, a place she had helped put on a map for men she never met in person. "We don't have a doctor authorized to sedate on site," said Marcus, the facility's junior counselor, panic climbing his voice. "We need EMS. Storm's coming," Preston snapped. "You know the signal drops the second those clouds hit the ridge. Just get him calm before somebody posts a video that ends this whole program." Caleb's shout rose again, sharper this time, a name Nora didn't recognize, followed by coordinates that meant nothing to anyone else in that hallway. Except her. She knew that grid reference. She had read numbers just like it off a secure screen a lifetime ago. Matched to satellite images, matched to men whose faces she never saw, whose lives she tracked as blinking icons on a monitor until the blinking stopped. Her hands wanted to shake. She didn't let them. "Everybody step back," Nora said. Her voice came out quieter than she expected, but it cut through the noise anyway. Preston turned toward her, annoyed. "This isn't your department." "He's not seeing us," Nora said, ignoring him completely for the first time in 8 months. "He's back in a firefight. Crowd him and he'll treat every one of you like the threat standing between him and his team." Marcus looked at her, uncertain, torn between his boss and the only calm voice in the hallway. Caleb's aim swept the corridor. His finger curled around a trigger that wasn't there. His breathing had gone ragged, fast. The kind of breathing that came right before a body simply stopped being able to keep standing. Nora had seen this exact collapse before, more than once, in briefings she wasn't supposed to sit in on, watching medics scramble to catch a man before his knees gave out mid-flashback, watching from a screen 1,000 miles away with no way to reach through the static and hold anyone steady. This time she wasn't 1,000 miles away. This time there was no screen between her and the man about to fall. "Somebody call the county line," she said. "Tell them possible fall injury, possible spinal, adult male, 6'2". 200 pounds. Now. "The signal's down," Marcus said. "The storm is right on top of us." "Then find a landline," Nora snapped. And for a moment the old command voice slipped all the way out, sharp enough that Marcus flinched and ran for the office phone without questioning her again. "You don't have authority to give orders in this facility," Preston said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty, the way it always did when he ran out of donor talking points to hide behind. "Then fire me tomorrow," Nora said. "Right now, get behind me and stay quiet." Preston opened his mouth to object. Nora didn't wait to hear it. She stepped into the doorway, slow, both hands visible. Palms open, approaching him exactly as she'd been trained to approach an asset gone unstable in the field, years before any of these people had ever heard her name. Her pulse hammered under her calm, the old fear rising alongside the old discipline. Because she knew exactly how fast a man in Caleb's state could turn a hallway into something none of them walked away from clean. Caleb's eyes locked onto her. For one heartbeat, the flat certainty in them flickered, like a signal trying to find a channel. "Who called that grid?" he said, low, almost pleading. "Somebody confirm the grid." Nora's stomach dropped. She recognized the shape of that question. She had heard it 100 times, whispered through static. Men trusting a voice they'd never seen a face to. Then his knees buckled, all at once, and he went down hard against the corner of the steel bed frame, his head snapping back before his body hit the floor. The sound was wrong. Nora had heard that sound before too. The particular crack of impact that meant a spine, not a skull, had taken the worst of it. Preston said something behind her. She didn't hear the words. She was already moving, faster than anyone in that hallway had ever seen the quiet contract nurse move, and every soft, curved shoulder version of herself fell away with each step. "Nobody touch him," Nora said, dropping to her knees beside Caleb's body. "Nobody move him, not 1 inch." Her voice had changed completely. Gone was the low murmur she used at the nurse's station. This was a different register, clipped and absolute. The kind of voice built to be heard over gunfire. Marcus froze in the doorway. Preston, for once, said nothing. Nora's hands moved fast, checking Caleb's pulse at the wrist, the pressure of 2 fingers precise and practiced. She leaned close to his ear. "Longbow," she said quietly. "Longbow, it's Raven 6. You're not there anymore. You're stateside. I need you to stay still for me." Marcus blinked. How does she know his call sign? Nobody answered. Caleb's eyes, glassy and distant, found Nora's face, and for the first time in 3 weeks, something like recognition crossed them. "Raven 6 was a woman's voice," he mumbled, barely audible. On the radio, only ever a voice. "I never once saw her." "I know," Nora said. "I'm the voice. Stay with me." She checked his hands, his feet, asked him to wiggle his toes. He could. Small mercy. But the angle of his neck worried her, and his wince when she asked him to turn even slightly told her this wasn't something a civilian first aid course prepared anyone to handle. "I need 2 rolled blankets now," she said, and Marcus ran without asking why. And something rigid, a cutting board, a clipboard, anything flat and long. She kept her voice steady, while her mind ran through the checklist she'd watched combat medics run 100 times from behind a monitor. Airway, breathing, circulation, then the spine. Always the spine. Because a wrong twist in the next 5 minutes could undo everything a helicopter and a trauma surgeon might otherwise fix. "Caleb, I need you to tell me if you feel this," she said, pressing gently at his fingertips, then his toes. "Squeeze my hand if you can." His grip was weak but present. She logged it out loud. Just as she'd once logged pulse points off a screen so a medic in the field could hear it a half-second later. "You're a nurse. Preston said, finally finding his voice, disbelief edging into anger. Not a combat medic. Right now, I'm the only person in this building who's done a field spinal assessment on a man who thinks he's back in a firefight, Nora said, not looking up. You can be angry about that later. She built the collar with her hands, one palm braced firmly against Caleb's jaw, the other stabilizing the base of his skull. Holding his head in careful, unmoving alignment while Marcus returned with blankets. Roll them tight and pack them along both sides of his neck, she instructed. Don't let them shift when we slide the board under. Her voice had the rhythm of someone who had done this 100 times, in worse light, with worse odds. Though she had done it herself only a handful of times, always as backup, always as the last set of hands when someone else went down beside the men she supported from a screen. Caleb's breathing steadied under the sound of her voice, matching hers almost involuntarily. Trained bodies falling back into rhythm drilled into muscle memory long before either of them arrived in this hallway. Grid, he whispered suddenly, eyes sharpening. Confirm grid, Raven. Nora's hands didn't stop moving. Grid confirmed, she said without hesitation. The numbers rising out of some buried part of her mind she hadn't touched in 7 years. Extraction inbound. Hold position. It wasn't true. There was no extraction. There was only a storm rolling over a ridge, a dead cell signal, and a woman in bright blue scrubs kneeling on a hardwood floor, with her hands the only thing keeping a man's spine from shifting wrong. But it worked. Caleb's whole body went still, trusting a voice that had once, a long time ago, been the only thing standing between him and the dark. Preston stared at her like he had never seen her before. Because in every way that mattered, he hadn't. Marcus knelt on Caleb's other side, following her instructions now without question, sliding the rigid board an inch at a time, while Nora called out each movement in a voice too steady for anyone in that hallway to argue with. On 3, we log roll him toward me, keep his spine one straight line. Nobody twists anything, she said. 1, 2, 3. They moved him as one unit, Caleb's whole body shifting in a single controlled motion, and for the first time since he'd gone down, his breathing evened out into something almost calm. Board secure, Marcus said, voice shaking with adrenaline instead of fear now. What do we do next? Now we wait for a window in the weather, Nora said, checking the strap across Caleb's forehead one more time. And we don't move him again until people with a real flight suit get here to do it properly. Preston lingered near the doorway, watching her hands work with a precision no consultant he'd ever hired could have matched. And for the first time all morning, he had nothing to say at all. Marcus glanced at Preston, then back at Nora, some old deference finally shifting toward the person actually keeping Caleb alive. What do you need from us until they get here? He asked her. Stillness, Nora said, and somebody watching that window for a break in the clouds. The landline in Preston's office was dead by the time Marcus reached it, drowned out by the same storm that had killed the cell towers an hour early. We have a satellite phone in the safe, Preston admitted, quieter now, some of the polish gone from his voice. For emergencies. This is an emergency, Nora said, still kneeling beside Caleb. Both hands locked in place. Get it now. Preston hesitated one more second, some old instinct toward image and liability still fighting the plain fact in front of him, and then he ran. While he was gone, Nora talked Marcus through holding pressure on the makeshift collar so she could check Caleb's pupils, his grip strength, the sensation in each hand, calling out findings under her breath like she was dictating a chart nobody else in the building could read correctly. Left grip strong, right grip weak, maybe a 4 out of 5. Pupils equal, reactive. Sensation intact in both feet. He's with us. Caleb's eyes tracked her now. More present than he'd been in 3 weeks. Though his voice still carried the flat cadence of a man half convinced the war hadn't ended. You were real, he said. I thought Raven 6 was just a voice they gave us to keep us calm on comms. Some of the guys used to joke she wasn't even a real person. I was real, Nora said. I never told anyone that. Not even you back then. Why tell me now? Because right now you need to hear a voice you already trust more than you need me to protect a secret, she said. That's the whole job. It always was. Preston returned with the satellite phone, hands unsteady, and for the first time didn't try to take charge of the call. He simply held the phone out to her. Nora took it and gave the county dispatcher a report so precise, so procedural, that the woman on the other end asked twice what Nora's medical background was. Field medicine, Nora said. Enough to know he needs a flight crew, not a ground bus, given the terrain and the storm window. Copy that, ma'am, the dispatcher said, and something in her tone shifted. The professional recognition of one calm voice meeting another under pressure. Flight crew's already being briefed. Keep that line open. The dispatcher confirmed a county medevac helicopter could make a narrow gap in the weather. But only for the next 40 minutes before the front closed the pass completely. If they miss the window, what's the backup plan? Preston asked, some of his old control-seeking instinct still flickering under the fear. There isn't one that doesn't involve driving him 40 minutes down a washed-out gravel road with a possible unstable fracture, Nora said, so we make sure they don't miss the window. 40 minutes. Nora had sat through longer waits than that with far less control over the outcome, watching a screen from a bunker instead of holding a man's head steady with her own 2 hands. We hold him exactly like this until they land, she told Marcus. No matter what he says. No matter how calm he looks. We do not move that collar for anyone. Preston lingered in the doorway, watching the woman he had dismissed that morning direct a scene with more precision than any consultant he'd ever hired for the center's safety training. Why didn't you ever say anything? He asked. About any of this. 8 months. And you never once mentioned it. Because the version of me you needed was quiet, Nora said, not looking up from Caleb's pulse. Quiet doesn't scare donors. Competent apparently does. Preston flinched at that, and for once had nothing polished to say back. There's a board meeting Friday, he said instead, weakly, as though the words had escaped before he could stop them. There's a man on the floor with a possible fractured vertebra, Nora said. The board can wait for both of us. Preston looked at Caleb, then at his own hands, still faintly trembling from adrenaline he wasn't used to carrying. For a man who had spent a career polishing a story about healing, he had never actually been in the room when healing looked like this. Unglamorous, precise, and utterly indifferent to how it might photograph. I've been running this place for 3 years, he said quietly. I don't think I've ever once done what you just did in the last 20 minutes. Most people haven't, Nora said. That's not an insult. It's just true. Outside, the first hard gusts of the storm rattled the windows, a reminder that the narrow gap in the weather wouldn't stay open forever. And somewhere above the ridge, a helicopter crew was already fighting to beat it, cutting through crosswind that made every minute of the countdown feel longer than the one before it. Marcus watched Nora's face for any sign of doubt, and found none, only the same flat, focused calm Caleb had been describing between shallow breaths since the moment she'd walked through his door. Dutch appeared at the end of the hallway, keeping the other veterans back with a quiet word here and there. The kind of crowd control nobody had trained him for, but that came naturally after enough years spent watching out for the man next to him. She's got him, Dutch told the others, more to reassure himself than anyone. Whoever she really is, she's got him. The wind hit the lodge in long, shuddering waves as the 30-minute mark came and went. And Caleb's breathing hitched again, panic climbing back up through the calm Nora had built. Raven, I don't feel my legs right, he said, voice cracking for the first time since he'd gone down. Nora didn't let her face change. Some of that's the position we've got you locked in. Some of it might be swelling around the injury site. Both are normal right now. Neither one means what you think it means. It wasn't entirely true, and she knew it. The way she'd known plenty of half-truths were the only thing keeping frightened men steady in worse places than this hallway. She kept 2 fingers on his wrist, tracking his pulse against the ticking count in her head. The same private math she'd once used to know exactly how long a team could survive without resupply, without evacuation, without anyone coming for them at all. 20 minutes left in the weather window. Preston's radio crackled from the reception desk, the county dispatcher relaying that the helicopter was airborne, fighting crosswind. 4 minutes out from the clearing behind the lodge. "We need him moved to the helipad the second they touch down," Nora said. "Full spinal precautions the entire way. Marcus, you're on his head end with me. Preston, you're clearing a straight path, nothing in the way. Doors propped, no exceptions." Preston didn't argue. He moved. For the first time since she'd walked into this hallway, Nora let herself feel the shape of everything underneath the calm voice she was using. The guilt she'd carried for 7 years, the mission where a team she supported from behind a screen had walked into a position she should have flagged as compromised, and hadn't, fast enough, in time. 3 men. She still knew all 3 names. She had never told a single soul in this civilian life about any of them. Not a therapist, not a friend, not anyone who might have looked at her differently for carrying it. She remembered the exact color of the feed that night, grainy green and static-lined. The small dark shapes moving along a ridge that shouldn't have had movement on it at all. She remembered calling the abort a beat too late, her voice cracking once before she caught it, a crack that had never fully healed since. She had left the agency 11 months after that mission, telling herself it was for 100 other reasons, none of which were ever quite the truth. Caleb's eyes found hers again, sharper now, present in a way that startled her. "You were the one who called the abort that got us out of Kendari Valley," he said suddenly. "Weren't you?" Nora's hands didn't move, but something behind her ribs did. "Yes," she said quietly. "I lost my spotter that day." "The guys still don't know why Command called it when they did. I always figured somebody upstairs made a good guess." "It wasn't a guess," Nora said. "I saw movement on a feed nobody else caught in time. I called it late. 4 minutes later than I should have, and your spotter paid for those 4 minutes. 4 minutes early enough that I'm alive to be an idiot bleeding out on a mountain in Colorado," Caleb said, and something in his ruined voice almost sounded like a laugh. "You want to know what carrying that looks like from my side? It looks like still being here." Nora's eyes stung. And she blinked it back the same way she'd blinked back everything else for 7 years, because the job in front of her hadn't finished yet. "You don't owe me anything for those 4 minutes," Caleb added, quieter now. "But you can stop carrying them alone. Nobody who's any good at this job gets through it without a few minutes they'd take back if they could." The helicopter's rotor wash hit the windows a moment later, a deep, pulsing thunder under the storm's own noise, and Marcus came running back down the hall with 2 flight medics close behind him, gear bags already open. "She's already got full precautions on him," one of the medics said, crouching fast to check Nora's handiwork. Whoever built this collar knew exactly what they were doing. "She's staff here," Preston said. And then, after a pause that cost him visibly, "She's the reason he's stable enough to fly at all." The lead medic looked up at Nora properly for the first time, taking in the calm hands, the exact terminology, the total absence of hesitation in a woman other people in this building had spent 8 months underestimating. "You military?" he asked. Nora held Caleb's head steady as they began the transfer. 4 sets of hands moving in careful unison, and answered without looking away from her patient. "I was," she said. "Longer story than we have time for right now." The medic nodded, professional enough not to push, and called out the final checks as they lifted the board in one smooth motion, carrying Caleb toward the propped open doors and the storm waiting beyond them. "On my count," the medic said. 3, 2, 1, lift. The board rose steady between them. Caleb's face turned toward the ceiling, his breathing calm now, his eyes finding Nora's one last time before the doors swallowed the sound of the wind. The helicopter lifted off the ridge with Caleb secured inside it, and the sound of the rotors faded into the storm within seconds, swallowed by wind and pine and the last gray light of the afternoon. Nora stood on the helipad a long moment after it disappeared, rain soaking through cobalt scrubs that had gone from bright to nearly black. Her hands finally allowed to shake now that no one needed them steady. Marcus found her there first. Raven 6, he said carefully, testing the name. That's a real call sign. I looked it up on my phone before the signal died completely. Defense Intelligence Agency liaison element. That's you. That was me, Nora said. A long time ago. Longer than it feels some days. Preston arrived a few minutes later, blazer soaked through, all the polish gone from him entirely. He didn't posture. He didn't reach for a talking point. I told a board member this morning that you don't make decisions here, he said. I need you to know how wrong that was. You needed a quiet employee, Nora said. I understand why. I needed to be invisible too. We used each other's blind spots pretty well for 8 months. What happens now? Preston asked. To the program. To you. Nora looked back toward the tree line where the helicopter had vanished. Thinking of grid coordinates and call signs and 3 names she still carried 7 years after a mission she couldn't undo, no matter how many quiet jobs she took in the years after. Now this place gets an actual clinical protocol for crisis response, she said. Not a PR plan. A real one. Staff trained to recognize a flashback before it turns into a fall. Trained to know when silence helps and when it costs someone their spine. You'd build that? Preston asked. I'd lead it, Nora said. Properly. With authority this time. Not a badge that says contracted staff and a boss who tells donors I don't count. Preston nodded slowly. Something in his face finally cracking open into something closer to respect than image management. The board will ask about your background. They'll want it in the brochure. They can have my rank and my discharge paperwork, Nora said. They cannot have Caleb's file or any patient's file ever for a photo op. That's the deal. Or there's no program. Agreed, Preston said. And for once, he didn't sound like a man negotiating. He sounded like a man who had watched, for the first time in his career, what real competence looked like when nobody was filming it for a donor reel. Dutch and the others gathered near the door as the rain finally eased. Watching Nora walk back inside, soaked to the skin, and for the first time in 8 months, nobody looked at her like she was just the quiet nurse who kept to herself. Raven 6, Dutch said, testing the name. Guess that explains the way you always stood with your back to a wall. Nora almost smiled. Old habits, she said. 3 weeks later. County EMS confirmed Caleb Marsh would keep full use of his legs, with a fracture that had come inches from a very different outcome. He sent one message back to the lodge, relayed through his care team. Tell Raven 6 the grid was good. Nora read it standing in the same hallway where she had once folded towels in silence. Wearing the same bright blue scrubs, though she stood differently in them now. Shoulders back, eyes steady, a woman finally done pretending to be smaller than what she carried. The new program launched that winter. Black Ridge Veterans Renewal Center began training every staff member in trauma-informed crisis response, spinal assessment, and de-escalation built from real-field protocol instead of a wellness pamphlet. Nora ran the training herself. She brought in a retired flight medic to help teach the practical sessions, and she made sure every new hire heard, on their first day, that the quiet ones in a building were sometimes the ones worth listening to first. She stopped hiding the 7 years she'd spent behind a screen, guiding men she never met through the worst nights of their lives, because she finally understood that the guilt she'd carried out of that valley wasn't a secret that needed protecting. It was the reason she was the only person in that hallway who knew exactly what to do when it mattered most. Caleb visited in the spring, walking without a cane, and stood in the doorway of the room where he'd fallen. He didn't say much. He never did. But he shook Nora's hand like a man greeting someone he'd known his whole life. Because in the way that mattered most, he had. Preston kept his word about the brochure. It listed Nora's rank and years of service in a single, quiet line. Nothing more. No photos of patients. No borrowed pain dressed up for donors. The board approved it without a single objection, and for the first time since Blackridge opened its doors. The program's success wasn't measured in smiling pictures, but in the number of men who left the mountain steadier than they'd arrived. Nora still wore the same bright blue scrubs every morning. She still stood at the same nurse's station, folded the same towels some afternoons out of habit more than duty. But she no longer curved her shoulders forward to take up less space in a room. And when a new hire asked her once nervously what her old call sign had meant, she told them the truth without flinching. It meant somebody was listening, she said, even when nobody could see them. That's the only part of the job that ever really mattered. There's a version of courage that gets photographed. It shows up in a donor brochure, or a headline, or a video clip that spreads because it looks good on a screen. And then there's the version that never gets filmed at all. A woman kneeling on a hardwood floor in the rain, holding a stranger's head steady with her bare hands. Saying nothing about herself until the moment someone's life depended on it. Nora Kessler spent 8 months being underestimated on purpose. She chose it. Quiet was the price of peace, and for a long time, she paid it without complaint, because the alternative meant explaining a version of herself most people in that lodge would never understand. But quiet and invisible aren't the same thing. Somewhere behind every folded towel and lowered gaze, she was still the woman who had once kept a team of strangers alive through a headset, carrying the weight of a 4-minute delay she never let herself forget. It's easy to mistake someone's silence for emptiness. It's easy to assume the person doing the smallest, least noticed job in the room has nothing else going on beneath the surface. Most people who carry real weight don't announce it. They fold the towels. They keep their heads down. They wait for the moment that actually needs them, and then they show up completely, without asking anyone's permission first. Preston Vale learned that lesson the hard way, standing soaked on a helipad, watching a helicopter disappear into a storm he no longer had any control over. He learned that competence doesn't need a microphone. It needs a chance. Maybe the real lesson isn't about hidden pasts or secret call signs at all. Maybe it's simpler than that. The people around us are almost always carrying more than we assume, and the respect we withhold from someone because they seem ordinary is respect we might owe them the moment it actually counts. Nora didn't get her authority back because someone finally recognized her rank. She got it back because she used what she knew, without waiting for permission, the second it mattered. That's not a military lesson. That's just what character looks like, whenever it finally gets the chance to show itself. The end. If this story reminded you that the quietest person in the room might be the strongest one in it, drop a comment telling us who in your life carries more than they let on. Tap like, so this reaches someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more true stories of hidden heroes on Emergency 911 Stories. We'll see you in the next one.